Hi there, my name is Lauren, and I'm a traditionally published best-selling author as well as book strategist and publishing consultant. And in today's video, I thought we could basically redo an old video of mine about how to get traditionally published, especially if you're a new author. The difference between this video and my old one, which was from like 2 years ago, is that when I made that video, I was an aspiring author, and now I'm making this video as a traditionally published best-selling author. So if you haven't really published anything before and you are interested in pursuing the traditional publishing route, knowing what I know now, this is how I would structure my pursuit of the traditional book deal. I have a feeling it's going to run long, but I would really encourage you to stick around for as long as you can. I want this to be extremely detailed, so here we go. Step one, you get an idea for a book. I can't necessarily tell you how to do that. Ideas hit how they hit in the way that they do, but I can tell you that when you get a book idea, something that you're kind of willing to play around with, this is the part where you would want to inspect that book idea. We're going to be kind of analyzing it, digesting it a little bit to see how malleable it is, if it's worth justifying an entire book, what the future potential of this is. And I'm going to ask you 4 questions about your book idea. So my first question for you is, what is your long-term vision? This can be personal or professional. My second question is, what are your short-term goals? This also can be personal or professional. My third question is, how would this book support both of those things? And my last question is kind of a meatier one, which is, what market or markets does your book belong to? This is where something known as comp titles comes into play. Normally, and I'm going to explain what that is, but normally you would do this a little bit later on down the road when you are positioning your book to pitch to agents or publishers, which I'm also going to be talking about a bit later on. But I want to identify that now, actually, which I don't really hear many people do, because the last thing you want to do is pour your heart, soul, time, energy, maybe even money into writing this book and then have everyone decline it because they don't feel like there's a need for it. You definitely wouldn't want that to happen, assuming that you want to go the traditional publishing route and you wouldn't want to maybe self-publish that book if it doesn't get accepted or something. So comp titles is sort of what it sounds like. It stands for comparative, comparable, competitive. I always forget specifically, but it stands for comparable titles, basically. And this is essentially where you are looking at similar books written by different authors that were all successful, that ideally were published within the last 5 years or so. So you want these titles to be relevant. And this is where you do a lot of different research to see for yourself and to show publishers or agents later on that there's not only a market for this book, but there's a dedicated audience in that niche. There is success in that type of category or within that market. The books that have been published within this niche have done well. You're just seeing where, basically, this is what you're doing, where on the bookshelf in Barnes & Noble would your book sit? That's a very, very literal way of thinking about it. But seriously, if you're like an in-person, physical, tangible kind of person, go into your nearest bookstore. It could be independent, it could be Barnes & Noble, it could be whatever. Browse around the different bookshelves and see where you think your book idea would be placed, and see what types of authors are located kind of within that area. And from there, you can do your research on what their book is about, what their success has been. And the thing that you would want to stay away from is comparing yourself to like New York Times bestsellers or international bestsellers. If you are brand new, you're a debut, you've never published anything before, that's a pretty lofty comparison to make. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I'm just preparing you for the industry, what they're going to think. They're going to see, oh, this person has never written anything before, and they're comparing themselves to Tony Robbins, for example. Like, wow, do they have the credentials to back that up? If they don't, then wow, I don't really think I can trust that comparison since they have nothing for me to go off of. So ideally, you would want to look for those mid-list authors, or authors who are kind of middle of the road, or maybe who are newer, who have been published through a small press. And you can do that by going to stores in person or by doing a lot of research on Amazon. I know people have different thoughts about Amazon, but there's no denying Amazon is one of the biggest e-retailers for books pretty much in the world. And honestly, you can just go down the rabbit hole and poke around and see what books are kind of similar to yours. That is a really long way of explaining what market, of identifying the market or markets that your book belongs to, the other authors you would be associating yourself with, the readers, what they have to say, and the customer reviews, things that they like, things that they don't like. Take all of that information and keep that in mind as you're playing around with this book idea. So those are the 4 questions I would encourage you to ask yourself when you get a book idea and you're wanting to know if this thing is worth pursuing. Step 2, you would want to review your publishing options. And I know that in the case of this video, we're talking about traditional publishing specifically, but it probably just wouldn't hurt to analyze your various options anyway. And the 3 most common publishing paths are, of course, traditional publishing, which is the hardest and longest to get into, but it tends to be the more prestigious. You have self-publishing, which is very rapidly growing in popularity. Colleen Hoover is a phenomenal example of someone who self-published and did extremely well for herself. 50 Shades of Grey, she originally self-published, but in that case, you would be responsible for everything. You're going to be held liable for everything. You're going to pay for everything, but in exchange, you get a lot of creative freedom. You significantly decrease the time investment. You know, it might take a couple years to self-publish versus maybe like a few months to self-publish. And then you have a blend of the 2, which is hybrid, and that's still pretty new. People have different thoughts about that. They are sometimes compared to vanity presses, and the difference between a hybrid and a vanity press is that a hybrid tends to have more ethical, it just tends to kind of have a more ethical stance when it comes to publishing. Either way though, you're paying to get published. Hybrid is like they have your best interest at heart. You pay $8,000 to get published and you have a team that kind of does it for you. So basically you're paying people to publish your book for you. But you still have that creative freedom and flexibility and still get majority of the royalties or the profit just like you would if you self-published. So that's a whole other separate video I could go down. In fact, I think I did make a video about that a while ago. So if I did, I'll link that somewhere. It's also worth looking at some of the pros and cons of self-publishing, traditional and hybrid publishing. So I just have a couple quick graphics I'm going to pop up here. Feel free to pause this, read through each of them if you want. I try to be as specific as I could. And using that as a way to further verify that yes, traditional publishing is the way that I want to go. I like it because it's prestigious. I'll get a lot of credibility from it. I don't have to pay for anything, but I also acknowledge that in exchange, I am going to get 10% of the royalties. That 10% or less is pretty much industry standard. You know, it just depends on how much value you're placing on the book and what you want that particular publishing path to offer you as a new author. Number 3, once you've further confirmed that you want to go the traditional publishing route, it's worth understanding really truly how that process works. So I'm going to pull up a graphic that I designed that sort of explains the whole traditional publishing umbrella because it is quite a large one. Within the traditional publishing umbrella, you have big presses, the big 5 as they're called. These are the top 5 publishers that all are located in New York City. This is like celebrities, influencers, industry experts. These are the people who get published through the big 5. You have mid-sized presses, which I really wish there were more of those, but I feel like they're kind of hard to find. But you have mid presses, and you have small presses or independent presses, publishers' presses. I was published through a small press. I really like small presses. But either way, whether you go big or you go small, they all operate the same way in terms of the publishing process. And Jane Friedman has a really, really good resource that she updates yearly that does an extremely good job of noting the specific details of the traditional publishing umbrella and more, including traditional or self-publishing and hybrid. So I'm going to leave a link to that in the description if you want to check it out, but this graphic was inspired by that one, so I can't take full credit. I don't want to be accused of being a copycat, but I just sort of took what I liked, kind of made it up in my own way, but the credit goes to Jane Friedman because her example is incredibly comprehensive. So the thing to know, if you decide to go bigger, with medium and especially bigger, the big 5, you are most likely going to need an agent. And an agent is going to be your representation. They are going to be acting on your behalf, pitching your book to editors and publishers in their network in hopes of acquiring a book deal. And the only catch is that you don't have to pay for an agent if you decide to go that route. However, like the profit that you get, the royalties that you get off of your book, they're going to get 15% of that. So if you want to know how you fit into everything, assuming you go with a large enough press that would require an agent, you publish a book. Your publisher is going to take 90% of the profit because they are paying to publish your book. You're not paying anything. That's the benefit of going traditional. You don't have to pay anything, but because your publisher is, they're going to reap majority of the royalties. So they're going to get 90%, let's say. If you have an agent, they're going to get 15%. So if it's your book, you are going to get a very, very small, measly percentage of your book royalties, which is why I'm very comfortable saying that you're not going to make a living off of a traditional book publishing deal, unless you are somehow chosen for a celebrity book club pick. Read with Jenna, Reese's Book Club. You go viral on Book Talk. If you get a movie deal, there's a lot of money in movie and TV adaptations of books. Unless one of those things happen, you're not going to make money off of book sales because of all of those different percentage cuts. However, don't let that scare you off, because the benefit of having an agent is that they can help with contracts, because when you get a book deal, that's all going to be in the form of a contract. They can help with negotiations, making sure that what's in your contract and what the publisher is wanting is within your best interest, because your agent is on your same side. If you don't get paid, they don't get paid. So they're gonna be advocating for you, because it's like you both are on the same team. It's not you versus the agent versus the publisher. It's you and the agent and the publisher, and the agent sort of acts as like the middleman. So they're going to be looking out for your best interests with those contracts, with those negotiations. They're going to be looking at rights and sub-rights. That would be like translation rights. If your book is going to get printed or published in different countries. If someone wants to pick up your book and do a Hulu TV adaptation of it, for example. They're going to help with project management. They're going to help with editorial work. I'm going to be talking about all this a little bit later too, but when you pitch your materials to an agent, in order to get them to start pitching to publishers on your behalf, they're going to be looking at your manuscript and offering a little bit of some editorial feedback before you get a dedicated editorial editor when you're with a publisher. So you're going to help with that, networking, and pitching to editors. So agents really are kind of the middlemen when it comes to the book industry. They're sort of in two places at once. They're on the creative side supporting you, and they're on the business side talking and negotiating with publishers and their editors. I know that's a whole lot of information. Take a minute and digest that if you want. Go back and take some notes. Actually, this video is in notes form on my blog. So if you want to get everything sort of automatically spelled out so you don't have to take notes or something, I have that in the description as well. But that's kind of what the benefit is of an agent. The perk of going with a small press is that you most likely don't need an agent. If you decide to not get an agent, you are responsible for reviewing your contract, asking questions, but in exchange, you don't have to give them that extra 15%. I will say too that if you decide to go unagented with a small press, the Authors Guild offers memberships, and if you subscribe to their membership, which is like $135 a year in US dollars, they have a legal team that can review book contracts for you if you want to get a second pair of eyes on it. And I believe if you pay the membership, that's for free. Don't quote me on that, but I also have them linked in the description as well if you want to check out their website. So in terms of the literal process of either way, I get into a traditional press, whether it's big, medium, or small. What does that look like? How do I play into it? I have another graphic for that. I'm really big on graphics if you haven't noticed already. We have acquisition, editing, design, production, marketing, and distribution. I kind of already mentioned this before. But what I've done is I've split you versus the publisher so you can see what your various roles are. Either way, you can kind of read through this, take a minute, take a screenshot if you want. I'm not going to go through every single... I don't want to read you the graphic when you can read it yourself. So feel free to take this and just sort of digest it on your own if you want to know more about how you fit into that process yourself. But generally, if you want to know, once I get a book deal, what happens? This is what happens, and this is how you fit into it. And generally, this is how both of your roles and responsibilities are split between you and your publisher. The only thing I didn't include in here was an agent. I guess you can kind of think of them as like a blend between the two. Either way, they're going to be supporting you. So if it really truly is a goal of yours to pursue a mid-size or especially a large publisher, you have to think about what you have to offer to them, which is a very different way of thinking versus 40, 50 years ago in the industry, where you were just responsible for writing the book and producing the quality material. Now, it helps to have a presence somewhere because publishers, the larger they get, want to know that you're a sure bet and you're able to sell, for example, 10,000 copies of your book on your own. So this is the part where we're gonna be talking about your platform. And platform does not just have to be digital, although we live in a digital age. It just has to do with your influence or your impact on people and the kind of audience that you have a connection with and how deep or wide that connection goes. I pulled this information from a course on Domestika that Courtney Mom did. So again, I can't really take credit for this, but I just thought the material was really, really good. So I just thought I would kind of generally share what it was that she talked about. And she divvied this up, the whole platform thing, into a couple different categories. You have, of course, virtual, you have physical, your personal network, meaning who do you know and what can they do for you to help you with your goals, and any other publications or features that you've had before. Basically, you want to prove that you are capable and qualified to write this book and you're able to help sell it. So if we're looking at virtual reach, this is what platforms are you currently on? What is your total follower count? What do you have a newsletter? If you do, how many subscribers do you have? And what's your open rate, meaning like what is the percentage of people who open your newsletters and read through it? And do you have any media appearances or any notable media appearances that are worth mentioning? This can also include podcasts. And the golden question that people think to ask is, how many followers do I need to publish a book? It's just going to vary. But generally, I would say if you're going for larger presses, a minimum of 10,000 is what I would say. But I don't want that to be a hard and fast rule, because I don't want you to start freaking out and be like, oh my God, I can't publish my book now because I don't have 10,000 followers. No, it doesn't hurt to just try, right? It does not have to be so high stakes. If people don't like what you have to say or they don't feel like you have a wide enough reach, the worst thing that they say is no. And it might delay your publishing journey a bit longer. You can either keep trying, you can make some alterations, but either way, give it a go. It does. I personally believe I would rather have 500 people that love what I post and truly are engaged with what I do and follow me and interact with me, versus having 500,000 followers who are all passive and maybe 1% of them will see that I have a book out. Personally, I would prefer that, and there are agents and other people in the industry out there making a case for that 500,000 followers does not necessarily mean 500,000 potential buyers. The emphasis makes more sense to be on engagement. You could have 1,000 followers and have an awesome engagement rate versus, I don't know. You know what I'm saying, right? It's so subjective. With physical reach, this is where you are giving lectures or presentations. This is where you've maybe done speeches. If you've done any workshops, webinars, retreats, if you've been on any panels, any kind of in-person event that maybe has been recurring, or different events that you've spoken at. And this is more of being one of the experts there versus being one of the attendees who is there to listen and learn. It's great that you attended a writer's conference, but does that mean you're able to sell 500 books? Probably not, unless you're a speaker there, or unless you're teaching something, or if you're giving a keynote or something. And the third one, of course, your personal network this can be extremely valuable. This is not the most beautiful thing in the world to do, but I would argue that it is necessary. If you haven't done this already, and this would just be a good exercise in general, is to go through everyone in your contacts list on your phone, everyone in your email list, everyone, that you're connected with on social media that you have a personal or professional relationship with. Write down their name, their contact information, and see if there are any hidden opportunities in the people you already know. Or if there's someone that you want to be connected with, ask for an introduction through a mutual connection. You can find out who those mutual connections are on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a really great place to kind of sort of people search, in that way, to see what kind of connections and overlap there are. And then publications and features, this just has to do more with proving that you are a capable writer, and not that you aren't if you haven't published anything already. But it's attractive to publishers the bigger you go, because they see that you have a history of publications and writing behind you. It just makes you look a little bit, it's like on your resume, would you rather see someone with 3 previous jobs within that niche versus 1 prior job? It's kind of like that. So this is where we're talking about any past books that you've published. In this case, you probably haven't made any past books before, and that's okay. This could be any articles or submissions that you've made to journals, to magazines, to newspapers. If you've done any guest posts, this can include blogs on notable websites. And a lot of this platform, a lot of it is going to pertain to nonfiction writers especially. This isn't to say that Fiction, maybe not so much, but either way, you're going to have to take inventory of platform-wise what you have to offer, because this is going to be an indicator to publishers and editors and agents about your book's sellability, if you're able to help sell it on your own. This is why there's a conversation around platform. Do I think it's right? Do I think it's wrong? I don't really know. I think there's different types of conversations for different types of questions, but you can't avoid having a platform. Do you need a platform to publish a book? Not necessarily, but it's going to be a lot harder for you to publish traditionally if you recognize that you don't want to have a platform. Maybe self-publishing would be the route for you. Maybe hybrid publishing would be the route for you. But if we're talking about traditional publication, there's going to be a conversation around platform and what your reach is, because that's going to tell publishers and editors and all of them how well you're able to sell a book on your own, at least in their eyes. Does that mean it's true? Does that mean it's guaranteed that you're going to sell 500,000 books? No. You don't know what your book is going to do until it's out there in the world. You just don't know. You can speculate and make as many educated guesses as you want, but at the end of the day, that's all you can do, is speculate and make educated guesses. Okay, so that's step 3, understand the publishing process. Step 4 is where you write the book. This is also where you're going to be spending a lot of time, and it's how you write your book is going to vary depending on whether you are fiction or nonfiction. Memoir is kind of the only little funky category. My book was a memoir. My book is called The Finer Things. I didn't even mention that. My book's called The Finer Things Club. It's a coming-of-age memoir about my experience living and working in Yellowstone National Park as a housekeeper. It's a mouthful. I wrote a memoir, so I know that it's kind of in this funky category. It's nonfiction, but it's heavily narrative. So in the case of memoir, you're going to kind of lump this more in with fiction just because it's so narrative heavy. So if you are writing a fiction book, for example, this is where you're going to be doing outlining. This is where you're going to be establishing your routine. This is where you're going to start getting into the habit of writing consistently. In my opinion, I don't think consistently writing means having to write every day, but I do feel like it means setting a cadence and a rhythm and a schedule for yourself and adhering to that, even if it's only 2 or 3 times a week versus every day. You can agree with it or disagree with it, but I want to recognize that people have different circumstances. They have different bandwidths. You could be a single mom with a couple kids at home and you're not able to write every day. You could be a single woman living in the city making bank, and you are able to write every day. Like, I don't know, circumstances are going to change, and I feel like the habits that you build and the schedule you set for yourself should be consistent with whatever it is you decide. So if you're doing fiction or memoir, I happen to have a free best-selling book writing course. I don't think that's the actual name, but all the right words are in there. But either way, it's a free course on my website about helping you to write that book. And it's 8 lessons long. All of the videos total about an hour. And each lesson, or almost every lesson, is going to have accompanied notes and exercises for you if you want to take it a step further and do a little bit of some reflection and practicing and stuff like that. So I'm also going to leave a link for that in the description, but that's on my website. It's free. Literally all you got to do is plug in your email and that's it. You don't have to pay for anything. For the case of nonfiction, this is going to be a little bit different because almost all nonfiction books are going to be based on a proposal. A book proposal, if you don't know what that is basically your book's business plan. You're not going to write the book, but you're gonna identify the angle that you're taking with your book, the overview, the marketability, meaning like what kind of market it belongs to. You're going to be talking about, your target audience. You're going to be submitting some sample chapters. This can easily be between 20 and 30 pages. Like it's long. It's a business plan for your book. And what happens in the case of this is you write the book proposal, and then once you get a book deal or a contract with a publisher, then you have a set amount of time to write that book. Or maybe you have like a month to write the first quarter of it or something. I really can't tell you what that's going to be like. That would be probably negotiated between you and whatever publisher you end up going with. But you make the proposal, the publisher likes the idea, they sign you, and then you write the book. So it's a little bit backwards. Versus fiction, you would write the book, the publisher likes it and gives you a book deal, and then from there you start the editing, design, formatting, etc. process. So the book's already been written and it's just getting it out there and editing it and cleaning it up. And for a book proposal, I have a free course that I'm currently putting together right now. My goal is to have it out by the end of this month, the end of January. Again, all you're going to have to do is just probably put in your email, but I have that coming out as well, and it's going to be a pretty deep dive into how to do all that, the different pieces that kind of go into it. I have like a video that accompanies a book proposal template that I've created for you. So literally everything is going to be packed into there. It's free because I'm a nice person, and that's going to be available soon. It's been on my list to get that out. So you have that coming down the pipeline if you fit into the nonfiction category.
Hey y'all, I just realized I forgot to include a very important piece of the traditional publishing process, which is that typically after you write a book, you also edit it. I didn't include anything about editing in my notes for this video, so this is future Lauren telling past Lauren you should have included something like that. So if we're going to be talking about editing your book, I'm going to pop a couple different graphics up on the screen, and one of them is going to kind of outline the different types of editors. When you do get published, you are going to have an editor on your team that's going to be looking at your book before it's physically published. But before you get to that point, you want to make the work on them a little bit easier. You want to make your book as attractive as possible as early on as you can. So that often includes a combination of both self-editing and maybe hiring an editor like freelance out on the side. That's what I did for my book. I combed through my own manuscript as much as I could. I got myself as far as I could knowing what I know about grammar and editing in general. And then from there, I hired a developmental editor, and she kind of went through everything to make sure that the flow was there, that the narrative arc was there, that all the pieces made sense, that things were kind of unfolding in the way that they needed to for a memoir, which is what my book was. But there are lots of different types of editors. There's going to be copy editors. There's developmental editors like what I hired. You can get a manuscript critique, which is where, you get someone's eyes on it and they're like, here are the strengths and weaknesses of your manuscript currently, and they're all going to vary in prices. It's hard for me to tell you what a flat price would be for those different types of editors, because they normally charge based on how many words you have. So they might charge like 3 cents per word. If you have a 50,000 word book, that's going to be less than someone with maybe an 80,000 word book. So just do your research, ask around. If you're part of any writers associations or anything, they're probably going to have different partners and people that they can refer you to. Otherwise, I know that Jane Friedman has recommended a couple people. I found my editor through one of her newsletters. But just do your research and just be aware that if you feel like you need the extra guidance, the extra help, maybe the investment might be worth it to you. Because for me, getting an editor was not cheap. It was probably around $2,000 or so. And I personally made that investment because, I wanted my manuscript to be as polished as possible, but I also wanted to know, for me as a professional, what my strengths and weaknesses are as a writer, because I didn't really do the beta reading thing. Beta reading is like when you have people like other writers and stuff read and critique your work. I didn't do that because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know that was a thing. But if you want to just get more professional insight on, as a writer, what your strengths and weaknesses are, hiring an editor can be a great way to do that too. You're kind of killing two birds with one stone. You're getting feedback on your writing skills and your manuscript. So that's my 2 cents when it comes to editing, but as always, feel free to do your own research.
Step 5. This is where we're going to be prepping submission materials, and I'm going to explain what this is a little bit. This is where you're submitting these materials to an agent. If you decide to go the agent route, if you're wanting a mid-size or a large publisher, you would submit these to an agent. If you're wanting to go with a small press, you most likely wouldn't need to, and you would just submit it directly to the publisher. Usually, you're going to submit these in an email, but in some cases, there's a portal where you can upload documents and submit things. I like the portals. It's just going to change based on the different publishers and their different submission guidelines that are out there, because they're all going to vary. Different agents and different presses are going to have different ways that they want you to submit your materials. So you have to read the fine print. You have to follow every single submission guideline that they list out. Sometimes they're big, like sometimes they're short, sometimes they're long, but if you don't follow them, they're not going to consider you. So you have to be detailed, meticulous, and accurate with this. It's just like applying to a job. If they say they want your resume and a cover letter, you submit both of those things and make sure that they're grammar free and that they look good and it's formatted and everything correctly. This is like applying to a job. You want everything to be accurate. You want it to be professional. You want it to be formatted. So please read everything, and you won't end up in the slush pile or the trash pile. In the case of fiction or memoir, you are going to be submitting most likely a combination of some of these things. The first one being a query letter, which is basically, it's like a cover letter. If we're comparing this to applying for a job, your query letter is like your cover letter. You're just kind of explaining yourself, you're talking about your book, who you are, etc. You have your synopsis, which is usually like a 1-page or so overview of your book and kind of what it's about. You're going to submit between maybe 3 to 5 sample chapters depending on the length of your book. Additionally, this is just me throwing in my own 2 cents, have an elevator pitch ready, because if you're going to in-person events like conferences, because a lot of agents and publishers are at some of these in-person events, if you get stuck in an elevator with them, or if you're kind of walking down the hallway with one of them and they ask, oh, hey, what kind of project are you working on? You better have that elevator pitch. And that is where you are able, ideally, to describe your book in 1 sentence. 2 maximum. So for me, when I described what my book was about, I said it was a coming-of-age memoir about my experience living and working in Yellowstone National Park as a housekeeper. Boom. That's my whole book. Basically, in 1 sentence, that's what the book is about. And your goal is to get a manuscript request from an agent if that's kind of the route that you're going to. You submit these materials with your sample chapters to an agent. They're like, hey, yeah, this sounds good. Can you send me your full manuscript? If you get that request, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get published, you're going to get a book deal. It just means that they're extra interested, you caught their attention, and they want to see what else you have. They read the full thing. That's when they decide, ooh, yeah, I want to sign you, or no, thanks, I'm going to pass. Once they sign you and you have an agent, from there, they're going to start pitching to people. And you might not hear back for a while, but that's where the agent takes your book, pitches it to different publishers and editors on your behalf, and then you would get a book deal. For nonfiction, this is where you're pitching your proposal, and then you are contracted to write it once you have that book deal. So in terms of submission materials for that, it would be your book proposal, meaning that huge 20 to 30 page document, and maybe like a query letter or something. So again, it's like a cover letter explaining what your book is about, who you are, why you're qualified to write it, why you're reaching out to this particular agent or publisher. It's like a condensed version of your proposal in this case. Again, you would want to have an elevator pitch. It's just such a good skill to have. It's just good to have all around with any project that you're working on, book or otherwise. And your goal with this proposal is to get a contract from your publisher to write the book. Oh, and before I forget, when you're submitting these materials, whether it be through a portal, I like portals because you can upload full documents. Most of the time, or at least half the time, you're going to be submitting a lot of these through email. People do not like attachments in emails. So if you have a query letter or a couple sample chapters that you're pitching, you're going to have to copy and paste everything into the body of that email. I've done it before. I never know if I'm doing it right, but I know that you're supposed to do that. So they're not going to look at it if it's an attachment just because of security reasons. They don't want to accidentally download a virus or something. It's just, they just don't want to risk it unless it's listed in the submission guidelines. Put everything into the body of the email. Or if it's a portal, you can just upload documents in whole. That's why I like portals. It just makes me feel like I'm doing it right. Okay, number 6. This is where you're going to start pitching to agents and publishers. Now you might think, Lauren, we sort of already talked about that. Yeah, but I didn't tell you where to look for those publishers and agents. So that's kind of where what we're going to be doing in this one. I actually have a blog about this too, about where to find agents. I would highly recommend you check that out if you kind of want to take your time going through this particular part of the process. But first of all, it helps to ask around to see if you know anyone who might happen to know a publisher or an agent or someone who works somewhere who can maybe help you with something.
Hey, so I'm editing, and real quick, I did forget to mention that you can always pull books that are similar to yours and flip all the way to the very end where there's like the acknowledgement section, and sometimes they list who their agent is, who their editor was, members of their team, etc. And also in the very front of the book, in like the first few pages or so, it'll tell you who their publisher was. So just another little tip if you want to find agents or editors.
That's why I said earlier on that it's really, really beneficial to document who you know and maybe who they know. LinkedIn is a really great way to do that. I've said that before, but I'm going to say it again. It's drastically going to reduce your time investment because it can take years to get an agent. The book publishing space is extremely competitive, and I feel like it's only gotten more competitive. Who doesn't want to write a book now? Like, everyone wants to write a book. It's crazy. So if you happen to know someone, that could cut your time down by years. It's amazing. So start there first. In terms of where you find agents specifically, I would say that databases and conferences are going to be your best bet. There's different types of databases. Publishers Marketplace is the most popular. It's extremely reputable as well. The cost for this is a little bit pricey. It's $25 a month, but if you really take your time packing in the work and kind of front loading it, you might be able to cut that down to maybe $50 over the course of 2 months versus whatever 25 times 12 is for the year. There's querytracker.net, which is free, but you can also upgrade to $25 a year. There's Duotrope. And a lot of these too have query organizing tools for when, like, it helps you organize what queries or pitches you've sent, and like might help you simultaneously with finding people to pitch to. So some of these are kind of a blend where it's like you can pitch, but it also helps organize your stuff. Duotrope is $5 a month, or you can upgrade to $50 a year. And pw.org is a nonprofit. They have a lot of really good resources. It stands for Poets and Writers, and they are free. I haven't heard of anyone who's gotten an agent off of there, but they do have listings. And then conferences and events are really good for meeting agents, and often you can schedule a time for a pitch session, and these might be, I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes or something. They're really, really short, which is why you want to know your stuff and have that elevator pitch down pat. You want to show up ready to take full advantage of the maybe 5 minutes you're going to get. So conferences are a great way to network and meet agents in person, and then later on, if they're like, oh, hey, send me an email with your book and then we'll talk further, you can say, oh, hi, my name's Lauren. I briefly chatted with you at this conference on this date about my book, right? It's just, it's that more of a connection. You can say that you've met them at this event, and it's just going to help them pay a little bit more attention to your email because they wanted you to email them and you've met them in person. Conferences are going to vary state by state, but I did include a couple resources. One of them is awpwriter.org, and this is a directory of conferences and centers, and these are some of like the bigger ones that happen in the States. pw.org, Poets and Writers, they have a list of conferences as well. And then in terms of publishers, like small presses, start local. There's a lot of local events that happen, writers conferences, there's local meetups, there's local writers groups, there's local or regional chapters for writers associations. Like, start local if you're wanting to do a small press. If you join a writers association, they might make those resources and process a bit easier by offering you like materials. Often, like for example, the Nonfiction Authors Association has a lot of different partnerships with a lot of different people. So when we're talking about pitching, this is where you're going to find agents and publishers to pitch to, but mostly agents, and there's specific submission criteria. Everything is going to be listed on these pages. It's going to say whether or not an agent is open to submissions. It's going to say whether a publisher is not as open to unsolicited manuscripts, meaning you don't have an agent. It's just going to vary person by person, so pay attention. Keep track of it, take notes, make a spreadsheet, whatever you got to do. Subscribe to one of those query organizer tracker things. Those are those resources for you. Everything is also in the description box. We're nearing the end. We're on step 7. This is where negotiations and contracts are going to happen. The publisher's like, yep, this looks like a good one. I would love to offer this author and you a book deal. And then from there, that's when those contracts and negotiations happen, which is why it helps to have an agent who knows, who makes sure that you and them are both getting the best deal possible. If you're pitching to small presses, for example, this is where they're going to review your submission materials, offer you a contract, and then you would review and sign it. If you're uncomfortable with that, or you want to get a second pair of eyes on it, you can always sign up for the Authors Guild. I think it's like $135 a year, and then you can have someone on a legal team or a lawyer take a look at that contract and let you know kind of if it's a good deal or if it's a not so good deal. Because it is possible to get a book deal that isn't that good, and I want you to be educated and knowledgeable about the kind of deal that you're entering into. So take advantage of that if you want. Step 8, this is where the actual publishing process begins. Once you get that book deal, that's where the editing, design, production, marketing, and distribution process happens. So once you get the book deal, it kind of carries itself. You have that team that kind of manages your project and kind of, moves it from person to person. And when I'm talking about pitching to editors, a lot of these are going to be like acquisitions editors. I didn't specify that, and I don't want you to think I'm like jumping around everywhere, but there's so many details. Acquisitions editors are what agents are most likely pitching to, and it's most likely who you're submitting your book materials to if you're going with the small press. Acquisitions editors are the people who are acquiring new manuscripts. They're reading all the submissions, standing at the front door of the publishing house, telling you, yeah, you can come in, or no thanks, try again later. And number 9, once you get published, your book is out there in the world. Congratulations, by the way. This is where you are now able to leverage your book and your authorship for future opportunities. You can call yourself a published author, a best-selling author, a #1 USA Today best-selling author, like, you know, you can use that for a lot of different things. You can it's a lot easier to get publications. It's a lot easier to get speaking opportunities. It's a lot easier to get collaborations. Like, once you get the one book done, it's going to be a little bit easier from there because you've proved to yourself and everyone else that you can write a book, and you were able to traditionally publish it at that, which is, it's difficult to do. So there's a lot of credibility and prestige that comes from traditional publishing, even if you know, regardless of the size. Either way, there was a big vetting process that you had to go to. So that's kind of what happens if you want to get traditionally published, and things that you just kind of have to know about. It's a long process. It's you're playing a long game when you decide to traditionally publish. It depends on the kind of value that you're going to place on your book, the opportunities that you want to get from it, and once your book does get published, revisit that long-term vision and those short-term goals that you set for yourself early on at step 1. See if you're on the right track for that, and then kind of continue thinking about what it is that you want, what you want your next big opportunity to be, and how you can leverage your book to get that. So that's why I said early on that you really kind of want to set those goals and get clear about your vision and kind of how your book can support that vision, whatever that is, fiction or nonfiction. So I hope this was helpful. I told you it was going to be jam-packed, that it was going to be a bit long, but if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below. Check out my blog. Otherwise, I think that's all I got for you. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.